feel comfortable with that. Obviously, you feel free to keep your cameras off. We'd ask during the first first half of the session, while we're doing some of the presentations and run through of processes, that keep, if you don't mind, staying muted. But if you have any questions that are coming up as we're speaking, please do feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll aim to respond to them as we go along. And then, of course, the second half of the session is going to be a Q&A, so that will be open to everyone for discussion. There's closed captioning available for those who want to use it. And as I say, feel free to engage with the chat. We're going to keep the webinar open for an extra 10 minutes at the end after 1 o'clock GMT for any further questions that people might have. But we do hope to get to all your questions as we go through today's session. So first, just to set the tone of today's webinar. At the JDSP, we're dedicated to finding new ways of ensuring ethical and fair practices, equality and diversity throughout our work at all levels, and to ensure that all voices and all bodies are supported and represented by the journal's work in dance and somatic scholarship and practice. So as such, we wanted to open out to you, our community, to both old and new friends and colleagues, to demystify the processes of submitting work to the journal, whether that be standard written articles or through less traditional formats exploring practice, or working as a peer reviewer, getting more involved with editorial work, or becoming involved as a board member. So we reached out to you, our community, to ask you what you would want to find out through these webinars. And so following your response, and a huge thank you to all of those of you who completed our webinar survey earlier this year, we've curated 3 webinars to answer and discuss your burning questions about authoring, submitting and reviewing. And our hope is that we can start to break down any barriers to engagement with the journal's work and academic publishing in dance scholarship and practice more broadly. So from the survey, you told us that you wanted more clarity about editorial processes, to know more about navigating peer review processes, what alternative modes and formats of submission, particularly those related to practice, are welcome, editorial timelines, and so on. So we've designed the webinar series in response to these questions, and we hope that we'll cover, as many of them as we possibly can. So today, the first of the webinars, we're going to focus specifically on JDSP. And each of the editorial team is going to speak about various aspects of the journal's work to give an overview. And then, as I said, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Natalie Garrett-Brown, who's going to tell us more about the history of the journal and the ethos behind it. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Marie-Louise. And look at that, the PowerPoint has magically appeared. So hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Garrett-Brown. I'm a white woman in my late 40s, very late 40s. Can still say that, though, and pronouns she, her. So probably just to signpost, the main bulk of this conversation is really about sharing with you the processes of how to get involved with the journal, etc. But we thought it would be useful just to give a little bit of history so that there's a context in which we're speaking from. So you can see here on the PowerPoint that began in 2009, so quite long established. And the beginning founding members of that was Sarah Watley, who I'm sure some of you know, Kirsty Alexander, also Polly Hudson and David Bennett, who was also really important at that beginning embryonic stage. So big shout out to them. So several issues published now. That's really exciting to see. So we're on issue 14, generally 2 issues per year, and it is a mixture of open call and special issues. So we'll come back to that in terms of how you might be submitting to the journal. And occasionally we've done double issues, and that's usually where we've had a particular theme that's really caught the imagination of our community, or perhaps related to the conferences. So the last bit of information you can see there below is about how many conferences. So we've just launched the 6th International Conference of Dance and Somatic Practices, and the journal has very much been a twinned project with that as well. And so you can see there also the editorial board kind of makeup. We do have a large and committed and really expansive board, actually. And I think that's one of the things that we're proud of about the journal. And that has really come about through networks, partly through the conference as well, finding new people that can be part of the journal. So integrated model there. So perhaps, Eugenia, we could move on to the next slide. So this is, when we were prepping for this webinar, I did a little bit of web surfing and found that this is still available, which is quite exciting. So you can see here the original volume and the original journal editing team, the co-editors, the book reviewers, the online editors, and the premise of which this drew from. So I think what's important perhaps just to name for today is that the journal in 2009 was very much seeking to build the community across what we could see, myself, Sarah and Kirsty, a really broad range of dancers and somatic practitioners that were all interested in similar ideas and ethos and choreographic practices and performance practices and teaching pedagogies and well-being interests as well, but weren't necessarily connected to each other. So the journal firstly sought to create a place for that community to come to know each other and to come to know itself and to develop its discourse. But in doing so, wanted a journal that could be open to many different formats. So absolutely peer-reviewed academic journal writing, but many different iterations of written expressions that came through from the somatic work. And Intellect publishers, I should say, have been incredibly supportive over the years that and developing wherever they can different formats and approaches to enable us to have this breadth of type of submission. So we'll speak to that a little bit later. And you can see there that along with submissions from authors or co-authors or collaborators, there is also the place for reviewing books and reviewing events and conferences. So it is a real space for the community to connect and share what's going on. Should we move on to the next slide, perhaps? So that's that was a very brief history of what was going on. So I'm going to pass over to Eugenie or Lily, I think, to talk a little bit more about what actually happens in terms of if you wanted to publish with us, what that might look like, and talk us through that a little bit.
Thank you, Natalie. So hi everyone, I'm Lily, and I'm just going to be talking kind of about the whole process and what happens a little bit behind the scenes when it comes to submitting and also reviewing work within the journal. So I'm just going to talk through this little timeline. And then I'm going to share my screen and literally kind of show you, do a little bit of a demo of how that works, which hopefully might kind of take away some of the fear factor on kind of actually submitting to the journal. So we have an online submission process. We moved from the kind of an email process a little while ago into this online process, which means that everything is kept in one place and then it immediately connects us to the work that's going through the system. So you can see here that from the kind of beginning of the process, so an author will submit the work online, and I'll show you how to register and how to do that in a moment. And that work automatically sends that to us as editors. And then we do an initial kind of review of that. The system will ask you to input an abstract where you can obviously briefly describe the work that's there. And we obviously just check that it's sort of relevant to the journal themes, specifically if it's for a special issue. And then after that process, we then assign an editor to that. So that might be one of us, or normally the editorial assistants that we're working with. I'm not sure if they've arrived yet, but anyway. And then that after that process, we go through kind of finding reviewers for that work. Normally and mostly we assign 2 reviewers to to review, and normally that process is double blind, which means that both the author and the reviewer do not know who each other are. We are developing and looking into kind of other more open review processes, which is something that we're working with Intellect to look into, and that might be something that you're interested in if you're looking to submit in the future, so that there's more of an open and more of a collaborative process when it comes to reviewing. But at the moment that is double blind, so as a submitter you will be asked to make sure that there are no kind of details of your names and things within the work itself, that it's been anonymized, so that that process kind of runs smoothly. So once we've identified suitable reviewers for that work, we assign them through the system, and they are automatic emails that go out to them, hopefully. As with anything, we do have to keep an eye on that people are receiving those. So again, as a submitter, as an author, if you're not receiving kind of communication from the system, then we have to kind of check that out. And then once the reviews are back in, which we normally take between sort of 2 to 4 weeks, but sometimes that can be longer due to just time constraints and capacity with reviewers, but where possible, we keep that process moving swiftly. Once the reviews have been submitted and the reviews have sent their recommendations, the editorial team will kind of check through those. And if there's no questions for us, then we will send those back to the author with details of what the recommendations are. And then at that process, that there obviously will be a recommendation that the work would be accepted or rejected or recommended for kind of minor or major revisions. And this will be communicated to the author. And then there is time for the author to obviously make some changes if necessary, and to resubmit that through their initial kind of submission process. So depending on kind of how that all goes, there's obviously kind of can be some toing and froing between reviewers and authors. We tend to take a very kind of involved approach, and where possible, communicate between the two, so that all questions between reviewers and authors are answered. So then once the author resubmits the work, it then could possibly go back into another round of reviews. So we could have 1, 2 or 3 rounds of reviews, depending on how much needs to be amended within the work. And we do, where possible, really sort of support that process, and it's not always just a case of just reject. If we feel like the work has the potential to kind of come in and be published, then we will support that process, and that's something that we're also developing kind of methods for that at the moment. And then once the work has hopefully been accepted, then the system kind of moves offline, and we go through a copy editing process with Intellect. So we worked really closely with them. We send them all the work. They then, once the work has been copy edited by their team, it goes back to us and is checked again by the authors. And then we get the typeset PDF proofs. They then go back to the authors and then back to us, which we send back to Intellect. And it's a very much a kind of passing process at that point. So that whole process can take anywhere between kind of 6 to 12 months. It really depends on when the submission has come in relation to when our timeline of kind of sending stuff to be copy edited. With general open call issues, we tend to kind of gather kind of what we've got ready to go, and then try and work on sort of filling up an issue with that. So sometimes the process of getting a kind of acceptance for your submission may be sooner, but it just depends where it's come in that process, and then it may need to wait a little while until the next kind of issue that it will be ready for, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And then obviously we have the special issues, which are kind of much more kind of set in terms of timing for the calls and things like that. So some of you might have seen our recent one on teaching practice. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Just shout if you cannot see that. Can you see the Intellect website? Is that what you
Yep, it's all clear, Lily. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I just wanted to direct people to the Intellect website, which is the publisher. This is the journal specific page. On here, there'll be lots of information about the journal. On here, we won't go through all that now, but there's lots of details here about the different calls that we have. And just wanted to point out, is it down here? This is a very long one. Notes for contributors. Sorry, that's what I was trying to find. So there are some details here which you can download, which go through very specifically kind of notes for contributors on suitable sort of submissions and specific details that need to be adhered to. So it's really worth having a look at that and reading through that, asking any questions before you submit any work to save kind of time in the long run. But in order to submit work, we have the online system, and you can find the submission button here. So that will take you to the NewGen website here. And then it's just a really simple initial registration process, which I won't go through in detail. But I'm just going to log in. Hopefully this works quickly. There we go. So I'm just going to really quickly go through what it looks like to submit through this demonstration. So you should find this here. Any submissions that you already have will show up in this queue, and there is also an archive for any work. Also, if you have reviewed work, because you can submit work and also be a reviewer at the same time, as well as being a board member, all of those things can kind of go hand in hand. So that should all show up there. Okay. So when you come to submit, initially it will ask you what section. So if we have a special issue, then it should show up there. But generally, most of the time, it will be just for general issue articles. That just means we can assign it to the right place. So there are some submission requirements, checklists that you need to go through. These are quite straightforward, but just quickly, so the submission, we obviously don't want work that's been previously published elsewhere, so you have to kind of note that you recognise that. There are certain kind of submission files that are acceptable, and that for references, where possible, URLs would have been provided. That's really useful for obviously people reading the work. The text is double-spaced, 12 point, all of those kind of other specific formatting issues. And that the text or submission adheres to the stylistic and bibliographic requirements outlined in the author guidelines from Intellect. So again, all of that can be found on the website. And I think we're going to put all of these kind of little resources in a pack to share afterwards as well, so they can be easily found. Again, here, the submission needs to be fully anonymized. So obviously we're sticking to that at the moment. We're working on sort of shifting to other review processes, but you have to acknowledge that you've done that, because that's the kind of responsibility of the authors. And then here, should the contribution be accepted to the journal, all figures, so any images or graphs or any other figures that you want to include, you have to obviously have permission to use those. And we also have recently introduced an alternative text form. So for any images or other figures, there is alternative text provided, which means the work can be more accessible. So I should have been doing this as I go along, so I'm just going to tick all of these. You can include any comments to the editor. So if you have specific questions about your submission, then please include anything there and we will see them. Okay. So then you need to upload your submission. So I'm just going to upload this demo document. You can upload, obviously it has to be in the specific formats, for any text, any kind of biographies you want to include, any images or anything, that all needs to go here. And then you just indicate what kind of file it is. So they've given you some examples here. So I'm going to click article text. You can then edit this or you can remove it, but I'm going to save and continue. Put these in here. So you need to include obviously a title, a subtitle if appropriate, and then the abstract. And the abstract at this point is quite important because it's the first thing that we see when the submission comes in, so that we know what the submission is about. And then please include also keywords. So the abstract and the keywords are part of what will be published as part of the work. They can be obviously updated as you go along, but it's really helpful to include anything there as well. And when you put in a keyword, it says here, press enter after each term, and then that separates each of them into their own space. Okay. So I've saved that. Obviously, then this is just the confirmation that we've kind of, you can go back and review any of the information you've entered before continuing. And when you're ready, click finish submission. So I'm going to do that. And there we go, submission complete. And then you can go back to review, you can create a new submission and return to the dashboard, which was that first space. If I do that, and then it should show up that I've got another submission there. Okay. So now I'm just going to briefly go through the process of receiving a review for the journal, which also happens in the same space. I'm just going to log out with that one. So when you are a reviewer, you'll receive all of the notifications for reviews through whichever email you have on your system. Now, often the kind of emails, because they come from a sort of funny online place, sometimes they don't get through sort of spam filters and things like that. So it's good to kind of keep an eye on that if you know you should be kind of receiving those. And to kind of whitelist any emails from JDSP. So you'll get an email to say, please can you review this piece of work? And within the email, that's where the abstract at the bottom should arrive. And so that's why it's really important to include an abstract as well, because that's something that the reviewer will look at to decide if it's something they feel they want to and can review. Obviously, we try and assign reviewers that do have some expertise or experience kind of in the specific areas that the work might be focusing on. But we do also, I think, like to send reviews to people that might not necessarily know everything. So it's also important that the work reads well for people that aren't the experts. So I think we try and get a balance there. So that's why it's really good to include the abstract there. So I'm clicking on. Okay, so when you click on that, all of the information about the request for review will be here. And then the system automatically gives a timeline. I think it's a week to respond to a review, which can be quite short, but as I say, we try and keep the process moving as kind of swiftly as possible. And then it's additional 2 or 3 weeks to review, I think, trying to work that out. But there is a little bit of leeway, as we say, and we just keep in touch with reviewers about their capacity and how much time they need to do that. So then if you want to, you agree agree to the data collection down there and accept or decline the review. So I'm going to accept this one. And then there are some kind of, we hope, very clear and detailed guidelines, which we don't have time to kind of delve into now, but to try and support and kind of steer our reviewers through the review process. Obviously, every submission is different and every reviewer is different and comes with different kind of ideas and backgrounds. So it can be also a very individual process, which I think we accept and we welcome, but we again engage in conversations with reviewers about that. And so those were guidelines in terms of the kind of criteria we're looking at, and also then in terms of the recommendations that we want reviewers to make. So these are set out in kind of very clear, you know, 1 to 6, but we do understand that sometimes reviews fall somewhere in between these. This is just a kind of a recommendation, and we look at both reviews that we receive, and if there are very differing opinions, then sometimes a third review is sought, and sometimes we go back to reviewers and have conversations between them and authors about the work. So in terms of submitting reviews, there is space online to actually kind of write review recommendations, but many reviewers also, which is really helpful, also use the kind of download the document and do track changes and make comments within the documents themselves, which is obviously very useful for authors when it comes to looking at feedback and making recommended changes to their work. So once you've read and understood all of that, hopefully we'll continue. So here there should be a document to download. So if you just click on that, it should automatically just download to wherever you want it to go. And then we recommend that you can add sort of track changes and information on the document itself, and then there'll be a space to upload that. But also adding additional text in these boxes here, we really recommend that you write that in a separate document, in a Word document somewhere else, and save that and then copy and paste the text in here, because occasionally things go a little wrong and people lose their work, which can be really frustrating. So you can type in there, and then you can upload any review files here. Oh, sorry, I meant to say that, so there's a first box, which is information and recommendations for the author and the editor. And then if there is something that you want to bring up with just the editors, then you can put it in the second box, and that won't be viewed by the authors. And none of it is viewed until we send it to the authors anyway. Okay, so then there's space to upload the files here. And you can also add a discussion, which will basically send a message to any, so that's me, me at the moment, but you can send a message to either editors or authors, no, not authors, I think just to the editors within there. So again, if there's any questions, you can do it there. And then you're asked to choose a recommendation. I think hopefully that will just let me submit. And then you get a little thank you. And then if you log back into your online profile, then all of that should be there. I'm going to stop sharing now. So I think that's everything. Should we go back to the PowerPoint? That was like a really whistle-stop tour of the whole process, and obviously it's something that develops over time when you get into it. Yeah. Anyway, I'll move on, I think.
All right, so hello, I'm Eugenia, and I guess we're going to segue a little bit, because at this point we've had, I think, a really clear demonstration of the logistics involved with publishing. But I'm sure a major question on many people's minds are, but what kind of writing should I submit, or what kind of writing is published? And I think what I hope will become clear is that it's not super rigid. It's not like, if you don't write in a particular voice and style with a certain format, that you will automatically be accepted or rejected or something. That there is sort of room for exploration. But what we have here are some suggestions from the webpage, and I'm going to start with the types of writing, especially because I'm going to send in the chat. There's already a lovely PDF on guidelines for alternative formats. So as you can see, there's traditional research paper listed. And the reason why that's just mentioned there is an acknowledgement of the fact that particularly for anybody who's maybe more trained in the humanities, social sciences, or natural sciences, there is a very sort of specific way of conducting and writing research. So obviously there are those papers that come in, but then in the document that I've linked, there's also an acknowledgement that there's other forms of equally acceptable research writing. So I would recommend just going to that document if you have a chance, because there's a really lovely set of bullet points. But just briefly, so an artist page basically is about basically the practice in terms of, as an artist, what kind of content, form, or technique have you been developing or innovating, and what do you wish to share with other artists and teachers? Whereas the practice as research and artist reflections have more of that element of what's the research question, what's the methodology, what's the connection between theory and practice, and still, so it's like, I would say those three, the traditional research paper, artist page, PAR, artist reflection, they kind of, one could easily move around between the three of those and sort of overlap. Something perhaps a bit more alternative for some people might be the visual essay. And in this one, the imagery rather than the words are sort of the dominant content. And for the viewpoint provocations, it's more about, do you have a new insight or perspective on something, on an existing problem? Or do you wish to critique something or ask a question to the field? And then having said all that, I will say that as a reviewer, I have seen papers that can kind of cross over all these categories or don't even fit into one of these categories. So hence the proposal format is not really so much as in there's a place in the system to say, I have a different format, but just simply that there is room to be like, well, I don't quite write in that fashion, or I don't present my research in that fashion. Therefore, this is the format that fits better. And I'll give a few examples after going over the list of themes on the other side of the slide. These themes are also found on the webpage. And I would say, again, as a reviewer, I have seen papers that fit within these categories and then papers that go beyond these categories. So I think the first one, the pedagogical philosophy of somatics, etc. I'd say that one I think is fairly straightforward, but I would like to probably maybe draw attention to the aspect about learning and creativity, because we've had some very interesting proposed papers in that area. And so also connected to that, the current application of somatics to dance/performing arts training and education. So already you can see there's two categories that are really geared for the educators in the community. And then there's the aesthetic implications of working with or from a somatic understanding. And again, where I would want to highlight is that it does not specifically say dance or movement or anything super specific beyond somatics. So I'll come back to that, the reason why that's so interesting. And then again, we have the body as a site of discourse in Western culture, the influence of Eastern cultures on notions of embodiment, and how somatic practices challenge / collude with these ideas. And I would say this category definitely connects back to the EDI efforts that the journal is making at the moment. And again, we've received some interesting articles in this area. And then, of course, very broadly, the future of somatic practices, so challenges, critique, and connections with other disciplines. And right away, a paper that comes to mind that I believe has been recently published and really spans across all of these was a case study paper that looked at both, there were specific dance techniques, but then there was like horseback riding. And also, I think there was Tai Chi. And it was also about a little bit about the actual practice of certain techniques, but also the teaching of those techniques. So that, to me, that's like one paper that really sort of just spanned all the categories at once. And it also kind of spanned all the types of writing at once. So, you know, just as an example of really how broad it can get. I've also reviewed a paper that could have easily been published in a medical journal. And then also another paper that read more like creative nonfiction. So perhaps it's not so helpful to say that everything is quite broad, but I just hope that it's encouraging for anybody who might be a little bit concerned that perhaps that they don't write formally enough, or that, you know, because they're not coming from a grant-funded research project, that, you know, they cannot possibly submit to the journal, because truly, I think, yes, a really wide range of articles have come in. And also, I would say fluency with English, because I've read some articles where it was clear that English was not the author's native language, but their overall narrative and key points were very, very clear. And then other times it's very clear that the author's very comfortable in English, but perhaps their ideas were not so well organized. So again, for anybody who might be worried about English being a barrier, again, just wish to encourage all of you who might feel that way, because I don't think that really stands in the way of a publishable article. So basically, we've covered the authors, how to get involved as an author. And I think a little bit was touched upon about being a reviewer. There is a call on the webpage for reviewers. And basically, it usually involves sending in a CV, just so that it's clear, so that the team and knows what your interests are, where you feel your areas of expertise are. I would say that I think being a reviewer is a really excellent way to get involved without having to make a significant time commitment, and without having to go through the anxiety of being an author, simply because it gives you a chance to see what everyone is sort of submitting, or what kind of content is being submitted, and perhaps think for yourself, oh, this is what I would submit. And then perhaps another step up would be to be a board member. And I say step up because board members generally are still expected to review for the journal. It's not totally separate. And the time commitment for being a board member, I would say, is fairly reasonable. There's a few meetings per year. And obviously, if one falls ill or has a urgent family commitment, there's understanding all around. And again, it's not like there's some sort of rigorous application process for being a board member where one's credentials are scrutinized to the nth degree. Having said that, there is going to probably be a call for board members put out in the near future, which might help people envision what they could contribute to the journal a bit better. Because obviously, one of the nice perks of being a board member is the ability to get involved in certain initiatives or propose things. So, for example, the conference committee includes board members, or the EDI working group includes board members. So those would be the sort of 1, 2, 3, and then the team / other category is just simply because obviously, as we mentioned, there is an editorial team, and historically there's a sort of back and forth between the board and the editorial team. But the journal is currently evolving, so that's not to say that there aren't other ways to get involved, or that just because you're not, like a author who's published multiple times, that you cannot then do something else. And most importantly, one or more of these roles can be done at once. So, for example, all the members of the editorial team are also present at the board meetings and have reviewed or are reviewing and have or currently are authoring. So and same with a lot of authors may be found on the board. So basically it's not like exclusive categories. So on that note, I think I will hand it off to the next person. The Q&A.
Thank you, Eugenia. I just wanted to add a tiny bit to that, which is that obviously we also receive book and event resource reviews, and so it's another way to also get involved, and another way of kind of developing and doing writing that maybe kind of a good way to start is to look at reviewing work, which is a slightly different is reviewed slightly differently. That those are reviewed by the book reviews editors, which is myself, Marie-Louise, and Catherine Stamp, soon to be kind of joining that team. But so if you're also interested in writing, but kind of starting out at that point, then you can get in touch with us about that if you have ideas about things to review. Sorry, so yeah. So now it's over to you, anyone that wants to ask any questions. If you want to pop them in the chat box to us anonymously, we can bring them up. And shall we come off the PowerPoint so we can see everyone? And Debbie, you've put your hands straight up. So would you like to ask a question?
Yes, hello. Sorry, I cannot open the camera right now, but thank you very much for your explanation of everything. I have two questions that sometimes I'm kind of messed up when sending papers. One is regarding the anonymous issue. It's like even the information that's inside of the paper, does it have to be anonymous in the kind of, if I want to refer to someone there is none, or a university, if the work comes from a non-university, that may influence something. So I just want to know if the anonymous is only related to the author, or it has to be related to some like critical issues inside of the paper. That's the one. And the other one is the review part. If I need to, regarding the review, if I send the whole manuscript with the review done, or only the review in a separate sheet of, I mean, in another like paper, not paper, but a sheet of Word sheet or whatever. Thank you very much. I hope it's clear.
Yes, thank you. Really good questions, because I think this question about making work anonymous does come up quite often. And other editors and people, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the main emphasis is on the author themselves being not identifiable within the work. Obviously, we do also understand that, or the field and the pool of kind of authors and reviewers often is relatively small, so people do know each other and know each other's work. But also the kind of most important side of the anonymous nature of it is that the reviewers are anonymous, which obviously we can make sure that is, if it is to be a kind of what you call a double-blind review. But where possible, obviously we want, if it is going through the double-blind review, that the author is not identifiable. There is obviously some background information in documents which needs to be taken out, which you can remove on kind of Word documents. So your name isn't in there, but within the work itself, it's mainly to do with the author. I think, is that clear? Is there anything else to add to that?
No, it's basically this one regarding to the author. And
yeah,
please.
Just going to add that sometimes obviously we don't want the work to be kind of disrupted too much, so it is mainly really about authors' names, and you can leave kind of asterisks in the place of names to help the kind of flow of the piece, and the reviewer will just know that that's the author's name being redacted. Okay, and then the other question in terms of reviewing, so it really happens in a few different ways, I think, and it depends on reviewer personal preference. But I think you can upload a document with kind of tracked changes within the text itself. You can also upload a separate document, which is just the reviewer feedback and recommendations, and then not necessarily put that into the box on the online system. So yeah, you can do all three, or whichever kind of is most suitable. Is that a good answer? Does that make sense? I think if there are ever any kind of queries about that, then just do get in touch, because yeah.
Yes, because I wasn't sure if we could send like track or the article had to be already clean, you know. And I said, because here sometimes they ask me for reviews, and the review is only the review part, so I have to, it's not the whole document, it's only review this, and then I have to send another document with this, and not everything. So that's my concern.
Okay. Yeah, review document, if you downloading the paper and then using track changes and then resending that's absolutely fine, because that's then really clear for the author which sections you're commenting on, what changes are being recommended, or if you have questions about specific things that they've said, then obviously it's really clear if it's in track changes. So that's definitely something that we welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Lily.
Debbie.
Lily, and maybe just to add to that, obviously that's our process, that's how we work. Other journals might have slightly different preferences or working practices, but I think what we wanted to do in this webinar is start to just give people confidence to ask those very questions of any journal, right? So if you're not sure, don't let that be a barrier to submitting or resubmitting. You know, when you get that feedback and you look at it, you think, oh, that's quite a lot. That's very normal, A, and B, it's really fine, as we're doing here, to go back to whatever editorial team you're working with and say, do you have a preference if it's not clear? So, you know, those most editorial boards, I think I can say safely, want to support the development of good quality work. So they will not see that as a problematic question. That will be seen as a positive question, because you're trying to be efficient and clear with the next version or the next submission.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie, for adding that. Is there any other questions? Anyone want to? Oh, so also Emma, thank you, has just put in kind of details of actually how you remove personal information from a file in the chat box there. My brain couldn't quite work quick enough to give that information, but yeah, so there is a specific way that you can do that on Word documents, which clears the kind of background information from that. Thanks, Emma. Christine. Oh, hi, Christine.
Bonjour, how are you? Thank you, everyone, for being there. Thank you for hosting this across the ocean, available at a normal time for across the other ocean. If you're on the eastern coast of the Atlantic coast. I publish already research paper format, practice as research and artist page. So I'm quite used to having images of my work included in all these formats. And it never occurred to me that I had to thumb my face out or something like this. Like how would I came this morning to have a refresher about the journal here and to see how would I submit a journal type, a reflection on a journey. I have an affiliation. I have a somatic school affiliation. You know, I have a way of practicing. I'm not going to name it here, but it's recognizable. You will know who these people are. There's studio work, there's site-specific work, and I'm quite recognizable. So how would I do you have a suggestion, or should I address this to the editorial board just before submitting so I don't bother everyone here this morning? What do you suggest with a journal type with pictures? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, just going to jump in again because so yeah, again, really good question. And one other thing that I wanted to say, or should have said about reviewers, is if they know the work already, if we've sent them something and they think, well, I actually know this, they will send it back to us and say, I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to review this because I have, so that's another kind of, layer that can come up because, as we say, sometimes it's not possible to make everything completely anonymous from that side. And yeah, if I think when it comes to images, I guess we'd suggest that where possible, in the first instance, that any images that depict, have pictures of your face included, maybe aren't included in that initial one. We can always add pictures to work as it moves further down the kind of process when it comes to actually submitting it to the publishers. So if it's possible to have if it's, say, reflective writing and then there is images included, you could describe the images that are going to be used, but just not maybe send them, or send other examples that kind of maybe can relate to what you're kind of trying to share. Yeah, it's not possible always to kind of do it completely anonymously and perfectly, but we'll work on a case-by-case basis and try and do that. So it's a really good question, because I'm sure it has come up a lot, because often the work is very visual, so there are a lot of images included, which often include the people that are involved. But again, just ask the question of the editorial team to begin with, and then we can go from there.
And you did mention, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention, actually, the first article I ever reviewed was exactly the same circumstances that you described, Christine. It was a very personal journey of their practice. They did exactly what Lily described, which was for images that would have been too identifiable, they just made a brief alternative description and then kept in the images that were not so identifiable, referred to themselves by like a certain code, so to speak. And so even though it was like a specific technique that they developed and were associated with, I, as a reviewer, unless I were to do a really deep Google search, really had no idea who exactly this person was. So I hope that helps bring some reassurance.
Yeah, all I was going to add was, Lily mentioned at the top of the meeting, I think, but we are also looking at offering non-anonymized peer review process. We haven't quite worked that through, but it would really be for these kind of partly where perhaps the author is happy for that not to be anonymized, and also where the author was, you know, interested to have a more collaborative relationship with those that are reviewing in terms of the feedback coming to them. That's not the sector norm, so we're still figuring that out, and Intellect are happy to work with us on that. But I think, yeah, we really hear that, what you've just articulated there, the sort of the double bind of trying to anonymise where it has value and where perhaps it doesn't have value. Yeah.
And just to add to that, so actually I think it's choreographic practices that have started offering the model that's inspiring us in terms of the choice of keeping double-blind peer review, but offering authors the choice for this more open collaborative review. So I think that's something, as Natalie says, we're really interested in exploring, so that for those people for whom double-blind is still really important for tenure track, etc., that there's the option that it does remain double-blind. But for those who perhaps are more interested in building more of a mentoring relationship with their peer reviewers and really developing, I think the aim is that we want everybody, all of us, to, you know, be helping each other and supporting each other to develop our writing and practice. And so the open collaborative model would enable that if people so wished. But I think the important thing is that it would remain a choice. So as I say, watch this space, because we're really thinking about how we might go forward with that.
Just to say, we've come to 1 o'clock. Karen, I will definitely get to your question, so don't worry. But because I will be happily stay for another 10 minutes to go through any questions. But for anyone that needs to kind of nip off now, I think we just wanted to quickly say a big thank you for everyone for joining. And for really supporting these webinars. There will be some more coming, which is exciting. But one thing I just wanted to mention, which is a bit of an update that we've had recently from Intellect, is that they are developing, or have developed, a new platform for the journals, which there's lots of kind of ins and outs of that. But one of the main things will mean that there's more capability of the online versions, so including video and audio will be more possible, and it's things that they can now host within that platform, which is really exciting for a journal like JDSP, because as we say, that it can be very visual. With the Somatic special issue that we had recently, there was a lot of video work involved in that, which basically meant having links out to other places, and we had QR codes in the printed version. Obviously the printed version is limited still in its capability, but the online kind of possibilities are kind of further, which is quite exciting, and that's launching next week. So yeah, just wanted to add that. I don't know if Natalie or Marie-Louise or Gina wanted to say anything else before we carry on with questions. No. So we will share the recording of this so that you can watch it back or share it with anyone else that might be interested. We really want this process to be kind of open and useful for as many people as possible. So yeah, if you need to go, thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to be, you know, working with you at some point in one of the various ways if you're interested in getting involved. So thank you. So Karen, sorry to jump in there, but would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Well, I do want to reiterate that for our practicing artists, you know, who are submitting maybe photo essays on their work, it's kind of, you know, to actually have to go through and anonymize that is a bit contradictory, you know, is kind of a diversion from the actual request. So I see that being a real issue. But my question was about practice, and I work with a whole collective of artists in the field of outdoor public performance art. And so would that, you know, would you be open to, we partner with Intellect for a conference that we organize, and So we do book reviews on recent research and publication. But so I'm wondering if there is space, yes, for performance art practices within this journal. That's been one of my questions.
I'll let one of my other colleagues jump in. Can I just, to clarify, do you mean within the reviews or in the journal, within the journal in general? Or?
Well, within the journal in general, because like dance and somatic practice, it does dance, you know, from the editorial board's perspective, also include performance art practices. So that would be my question.
Is your question about the scope of the journal? Sorry, I'm not quite following. Or
yeah, so you know, if you were to, would you accept an article about performance art practices? You know.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So what's our sort of definition of dance in a way, to put the question in a different perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly seen a very broad range of practices talked about under the umbrella of dance. So so I think the simple answer is yes, but really the fundamental question is about is it fulfilling the broader remit of the journal? So is it about that intersection between the somatic practices and the performance art? And really for dance, for us, that's movement, right, in its broadest sense. So I don't think it would mitigate from submitting. I'm not sure, I couldn't promise it would necessarily get received, but it certainly wouldn't be a mitigation for submitting an idea stroke article.
And my other question, I organize a conference called Flow in Body and Sight. And I'm wondering if I was to write a review, I mean, I collectively organize it with a group of people. Would that be seen as a conflict of interest? And should I reach out to somebody else to invite them to submit a review of the conference, or what would your recommendations be?
Yeah, Lily, do you want to give a response? I mean, we've had a variation of who writes about conferences and events. There's no fast and hard rule on that. But Lily, do you want to give some examples of how that's handled in the journal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't come across this very scenario of kind of reviewing your own sort of thing in a way.
It's a collective.
A collective, yeah. I mean, I will refer to Marie-Louise on this as well, but I think my initial response would be that I think an alternative perspective would probably be welcomed on that event, on that conference. Obviously, traditionally, people review books that are not their own. You know, we have reviews of books, and a book review is the kind of most traditional form of that. But we do really welcome other things within the review section, you know, online resources or events or conferences and things like that. Yeah, Marie-Louise, do you want to?
I was just going to say, we have had some really interesting reviews that have actually been collaborative and have been multiple voices. So that might be worth thinking about, that it might be yourself as the convener of the conference, but also then with other voices involved. So it's a more collaborative review of the event. There are already precedents for that in the journal, so that would be very welcome as well. And I think it's worth saying that even insofar as the review section is concerned, we're really very open to different modes of writing those reviews. So there might be more poetic writing in terms of responses to published books or conferences. So we are very open to different interpretations of what reviews mean as well. And I think we're quite excited by developing different modes of writing as well.
I'd also just want to add that a review could possibly also include maybe a kind of interview with yourself and the collective, so that your voice is kind of also included in that, but then it's, you know, someone coming in to ask questions about it. And most reviews are within the kind of smaller, shorter category, but there is a place for kind of something else, which could be a review and a combination of maybe interview and review. But again, we're kind of open to different ideas within that. So it's always worth having a conversation with us.
And do you have like, I know I don't want to be hogging the floor. I have several questions, so if somebody else has a question. But my other question was, well, I'm very much interested in the collaborative process. And anyway, I think I've had a blank on it, but that's okay. But thank you so much for this session today.
Thank you. Does everyone, out of who's left, do you just all want to put your hand up if you do have a question, so we just have a sense of yeah, how many there are. Oh, Lizzie, oh, so sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. Are there stated expected lengths of submissions? There are, but there is always flexibility around that. So I think sort of traditional papers are expected to be between 4,000 and 6,000 words, if I'm correct. So exceeding 6,000 is not recommended, just because we have to have an issue which has a variety of work in it. But there are often the cases where we're kind of reflective writing or visual essays are much shorter, so could be more visual work with kind of 500 to 1,000 words of related text, or kind of 1,500 words of a reflective writing. There is definitely kind of room for manoeuvre within that. And Fiona, I don't know if Fiona, you're still here. So do you do in conversations? Yes, I'd say. I think there's a very quick answer to that. Lizzie, did you want to ask anything else with that? Or?
Sorry, yes, one other thing. Is there any value in kind of getting an idea okayed before submitting?
Yeah, I think we always welcome kind of questions and conversations. Obviously, we can't indicate whether anything would be accepted or not.
Of course, yeah.
That review process. But for sure, definitely ask about anything. You can always sort of pre-review in a way before it goes into that process. Something else we probably should have mentioned is that we're kind of hopefully moving towards just initial abstract submissions, which we trialed with the teaching practice, so that people don't have to submit full work for it then to not be accepted. That's probably something we needed to share. But so if you're kind of worried about that, then actually the process moving forward will be to submit just an abstract initially, and then if that's kind of accepted, then to kind of move forward with the work.
That would be fantastic.
We have to just clear that with intellect and shift the process towards that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just really mindful of the labour that's involved, particularly for independent artists as well, who might not have an affiliation, the time it takes to write a full article before submission, and to sort of, honour the labour that it does take. We thought the abstract model might be a good one moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, any more questions? No, I mean, we'll obviously, most people have gone now, but we will share a mechanism for more questions and feedback following this. So if any more questions come to mind, then you know, you can add to that, and we'll share that with everyone else after. But
yeah, great. Thanks, Lily, as well, for all your work in the background to make this happen.
oh no, thank you guys. Thank you for your
Yeah, great. And I guess if anyone's got ideas about content for the other webinars, I know we do have a sort of plan for that, but if there's anything specific that you'd like to hear more about, we can also weave that into the future webinar series. So also good to get feedback on that. Great, really nice to see everyone. All right, I'm going to sign off now. Nice to see you all. Take care.